drug abuse, cancer,
measles, diabetes, AIDS, cancer.
Good evening once again, folks, and welcome to our Tuesday evening program, Doctor on Call. And this evening we do not have any doctors with us, but we are dealing with an issue or a topic that is very, very important, considering what we have been experiencing over the past month or so here in Grenada. Of course, COVID-19 has made quite a number of persons or people sick and has claimed over 130 lives. And that is something that is worrying. Of course, it has caused a lot of grief and pain to many, because many of us have lost friends, families, colleagues, and all of that. And so this evening we think it's important to deal with the issue of grief and loss. How do we deal with that? Also considering we're not able to do the final respects as we are accustomed to. In some cases, nothing at all. We can't have our friends coming over to sympathize and all of that, all because of the present situation in Grenada and worldwide, of course. So this evening, we deal with the issue of grief and loss. And with us, we have two distinguished gentlemen. Mr. Pearson Strovde, he's a trained counselor. And we also have with us Pastor Edward Guilliame. He is the Health and Stewardship Director at the Seventh-day Adventist Conference of Churches. It is a pleasure for me to welcome them, and let's start with Pastor Guilliame. Good evening, Pastor, and welcome to our program.
Good evening, Godfrey. Good evening to the viewers and listeners, both here locally and in the diaspora. It's a pleasure to be here to share with you on this very important subject, grief and loss. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, indeed. And Mr. Strovde, we welcome you as well. Being a trained counselor, we're looking forward to some tips and some guidance as to how we go about dealing with our present situation. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, and good night to you and to your viewers and listeners. Thanks for the opportunity to share. This is indeed a difficult time for many, and it has posed some difficulty for a lot of people. And so I think, indeed, it is a timely subject to look at so that people might be able to feel an understanding as to what they are going through a little bit more. Thank you very much for having me.
Right. Thank you again, gentlemen. And I'm coming back to you, Mr. Strovde, because I want to start with you, being the trained counselor here, and of course your experience and field of work is dealing with people, helping them with a lot of psychological assistance and all of that. When we speak of grief and loss, I mean, we all have an idea how we feel, but put it into context for us. When we speak of grief, what are we talking about? What are we feeling? What bring on that?
Well, in the simplest way we can put grief is that grief is a painful emotion of sorrow caused by the loss of anything or anyone that has deep meaning to you. In all respect, you notice that I indicated that it's a sorrow caused by loss. So in reality, loss and grief are almost synonymous with each other. And so that's why it's the loss of anything or anyone that has meaning, because you can lose a job and you can grieve. And there are people who are going through that process, even because of COVID as well. So really, is anything that you lose that has meaning to you and the pain that you are going through as a result, the emotional pain, the emotional strain, the emotional works that you're going through that is happening. So basically, I mean, that's the simplest way I can put it.
Right. Can you categorize it? I mean, are there different types of grief?
Well, yes, you can break grief down in terms of maybe some of the classes of grief, and so I think we could get into some of that. But I think one of the things that I think is important for us to make sure that we say from the onset. Because a lot of us look at grief as though, but culturally, we have a tendency when people are hurting, when people are grieving, sometimes we don't know what to say. Sometimes, in trying to be helpful, they say, man, you'll get over that. Yeah, get over that. We're trying to help, but it is important for us to understand that grief changes. It doesn't really end. Grief never really ends, but it changes though. There are different, you experience it in different intensities as time goes on. So as you move further and further away from the event, as you have the other experiences, it changes. But grief really never goes away. In other words, nobody really fully recovers from the loss of a mother through death, and especially if it is very traumatic. These things don't just go away, and because the human being has three dimensions that we have to keep in mind. The human being is cognitive. The human being is psychomotor, he moves, his movement, and the human being is also affective in his attitude. So when it comes to the cognitive things in life, we hardly ever really lose memory of things that are important to us. It will always, every now and again, it comes back. What changes and what are some of the things that you might adjust with when it comes to the attitude, the affective. So you might have a different attitude towards. When it is raw, it hurts. You can't even look at something that belongs to the person. But as time goes on, as the process becomes more and more, you become more acclimatized to the reality. You can do those things. And the attitude and say, you know what? In the case of my mom, she was in so much pain. It might have been better for her to go to sleep because, I couldn't stand to see her. But at the rawness at that, you can't think about that when it's too raw. You want to lose your mother at this time. But as you go and as time goes on, so yes, so I kind of wanted to make sure that I set that understanding, that perimeter around grief. Grief doesn't really, it changes, but it never really ends.
Okay.
Right? And we can later on, if you want to go into some of the classes and so, but I wanted to set that parameter very early on. Yeah.
Wonderful, and thank you very much, Pastor Guilliame. One of the pillars, if I put it that way, as it relates to grief and how do you deal with it, weighs heavily on the spiritual aspect of the human being. You have been involved in health a lot, and of course, you're a pastor. You understand how to get people to overcome that. Let's talk a little bit about that from where you are, a pastor, also the health and stewardship director at the Conference of Churches. So you come across a wide cross-section of people across the country. What has been the experience like for you, having to deal with members who have lost loved ones, colleagues? You in some cases probably had to provide some sort of service for them to help them to ease that pressure. Talk to us a little bit about that experience.
All right, so before I answer your question, I just want to express condolences to all those who have lost loved ones. And as we go from day to day, we realize that we keep getting bad news. Even today we had bad news again because we have lost a very prominent elder in our church. So really and truly, times have changed, and we are living under these conditions where we have so many restrictions. People are dying because of COVID, and so it is really a challenge, a real challenge, not just for us as ministers, but also for family members to deal with this situation. So what we have been doing in this case is trying to reach out to persons in various ways. Now, because we have the issue of, COVID, and we don't want to expose ourselves, and we want to ensure that we keep others safe. What we do is try to do virtual visits. So we touch base with the family members who would have lost loved ones as quick as possible. Try to touch base with them and bring some level of comfort, because what persons need now is comfort, and we can find a lot of comfort even in the Word of God. So the Bible says in Isaiah chapter 66 and verse 13, it says, as one whom his mother comforted, so will I comfort you, and ye shall be comforted in Jerusalem. And the Bible also says in Romans chapter 12 and verse 15, and weep with them that weep. So here, as ministers of the gospel, we have to sometimes weep with those who weep, because many persons are dying around us, many persons, and we have to try to bring that level of comfort, but not just comfort, assurance and hope, because when someone loses a loved one, it does not mean that all is lost. There is hope, and we can find that hope in Jesus, because he is still the resurrection and the life. So even though we lose loved ones, we can still look up to Jesus, and he is the one that can give us that peace that passeth all understanding. If you would allow me, I just want to add a little something to what Mr. Strovde would have mentioned earlier in regards to grief. I just want to say that grief is a natural response. Some people think that grief is something that is bad, but it's a natural response to any loss. And here, whether the loss is tangible or intangible, like today, I went somewhere and I left my phone in a certain place. I didn't remember where I left it. I knew I came out the car with it, but I left it on a veranda wall. And I went all over the place looking for it. I couldn't find it. So I thought it was lost. At that moment, I started to grieve, because my phone is so important to me. So important. I have a lot of stuff on my phone, and if I lose my phone, then it's obvious I will grieve because of that loss. So regardless of the loss, we will grieve. Persons who have lost material positions, they will also grieve. Persons who have lost position and status. And COVID would have caused persons to lose position and status. And because of that, persons are not just grieving because people have died around them or their loved ones have died, but they are grieving because of loss of position and status. If you lose a body part, especially a major body part like your hand, or you have an amputation of your leg, then grief. Again, miscarriages for women. If you have miscarriages, then you will grieve because you have lost, pregnancy. Then abortion is another one. If you lost your home or you lost your country, all of this can cause you to grieve, because you can leave Grenada and go to the U.S., and you realize that the U.S. is not a bed of roses, but you realize Grenada is such a beautiful country. It's so beautiful that you start grieving that you left Grenada. So here, grief can occur for any loss. All right. So here, as we speak about grief, we are not just speaking about persons who have died. Although we have to bear in mind that grief is more intense. It is more intense when someone dies. All right? So if someone loses their home or they loses their whatever the case is, but when someone dies, grief is more intense. Yeah? And here we have to ensure that we bring comfort to that person, bring hope, bring assurance, and let them know that they can still look up because our redemption draweth nigh.
Thank you, Pastor. Mr. Strovde, I want to come to you because listening to you, gentlemen, something crossed my mind, especially with COVID. And for example, you have maybe a wife or a husband or a brother or a sister, let's say, who comes down with COVID-19. That person is in the hospital. You told that, look, they're on a ventilator, conditions are critical. So the person has not died, but you are there and you are scared to death. Not scared of what has happened, but you are scared of what might happen. Can that also be classified as grief? Or I mean, you could be at a point where you're traumatized. How do you deal with that? Let's talk a little bit about that, Mrs. Strovde.
Well, to answer the first question, yes, especially if there is a very negative prognosis. And there have been prognoses where they've been telling, they say, we don't think that he's going to make it. Mm-hmm. Of course, grief begins since that time. In fact, there are times when grief can begin and end even before the person dies. For example, if somebody has a terminal illness, let's just say somebody has a terminal illness like cancer or so, and you kind of know this is not going to end well. Your grieving starts since that time, and you may very well come to resolve the fact, hey, listen, I'm going to lose this person, and you will actually go through the process of grief, resolve it, even before that person actually goes to sleep and is buried. So yes, to answer the first question, yes, it is possible grief can start. But how does one deal with that? The reality is that we have to understand that as human beings, there is no, and I mean, I know sometimes this sounds like cliche, but the truth is there is no timetable. There is no prescription. There is nothing that is written like some manual that says this is what you must do this way. The human being is so dynamic that no one person will process these things in the same way. For someone who might have gone through situations like that before, it might be different for them. They've experienced things like that. They've gone through situations like that, and of course, you don't want to lose a person, but because you've had experiences like that, it doesn't have the same intensity that it would have for somebody who has never experienced loss in there, especially loss of another person. So how does one really deal with that? At first, in all honesty, what really happens is that you get to a place of denial. Because in most cases it's hard for you to accept that this is something that they're telling you. You can't tell me that. I can't. How am I going to accept something like that? This is my husband. This is my father. This is my mother. This is my brother. To hear somebody tell me that is a possibility, that in 1 week this person will be normal. This is impossible. For many people, they go through that process of denial, of not being able to accept. And then eventually they move into questioning why, what has he done? There are so many people who to me wasting their lives away. Why not them? We ask ourselves those type of questions. Why him? Why is my children father that I have to be going through this? This man works hard. He takes. Why? We ask ourselves, and eventually we get to the place where we eventually get to the place where we realize, this seems as though this is going to happen. This is going to be the reality. And eventually we get to the place where for some people, we come to the realization and we accept. But that doesn't just come overnight. It doesn't come overnight. It's not something that just comes, ooh, wow, no. This is a process. Human beings are different. No one or no two people are the same. There's no timetable to this. There's no prescription to this. There are people who are at different places at different times based, even within the same family. There are some people, again, within the same family who will not experience that type of loss the loss in the same way. So what does one really do? one has to be able to recognize that, listen, and accept I am going through this. This is painful for me. This is not something that I want to happen. This is something that's very difficult for me. And that's one of the best things anybody can really do, is to be able to accept and the reality that I am going through a very traumatic time, and this is difficult for me. And one of the things that we have to do, sometimes we have to look for structured help, whether it's talking to somebody, whether it's counselor, somebody you really trust. And I know somebody say, Grenada's so small, you're too sure if you can tell somebody, yeah, that's reality. But, we may have to look for a very structured type of guidance in order to process and to go through those things. So that is really that is what is happening. Many people go through it differently. There's no prescription, there's no manual to go through. And of course, we have to get to the place where we recognize that this is painful for me. And sometimes we have to look for structured guidance and help to go through those types of processes, because this is not an easy thing to do. There is no easy way to do this. Grieving is not an easy cake. It's not an easy one.
Thank you again.
Godfrey, if I should add to what
sure.
Pearson mentioned there, grief is hard work. It's hard work, and you cannot get around it.
A lot of hard work, yes.
Somebody described it as a tunnel that you must go through. You must go through that tunnel. So, as Pearson would have mentioned, people grieve differently. So in one family, you may have mother, you have children, you have brothers and sisters. They grieve differently. So when you go to visit, for example, you go to visit a family who is grieving because they have lost a loved one, don't expect everybody to be grieving the same. You might find one person crying, always crying. They can't hold up themselves. We shouldn't tell that person, don't cry. Allow them to cry, because that's one of the ways of coping with a loss, So you allow them to cry, but you might find somebody there who's sitting very quietly and not saying a thing. That's their way of grieving. So it doesn't mean that because the person is crying, that person is grieving. That person alone is grieving. But the person who is sitting quietly there and just they look composed, they themselves, they are grieving. When it comes to children grieve differently to adults.
Pastor, just hold that point, because this is significant, and I don't want us to just fly through that. I'm going to come to that, but let me just ask you. You mentioned that grieving sometimes could be like a tunnel that you must go through. I like the analogy, but here's my question. In going through that tunnel, what if there is, let's say, a landslide and that tunnel is blocked? How does that grieving person get through that tunnel?
You see, that's why when you go to the Kubler-Ross model, to answer that question, there are times when persons, they begin with denial. So they don't believe that person dies.
Right.
They don't believe, or they suffer that loss. They just don't believe. So they go through that denial. Then they go to the anger stage. So they become angry, irritable, even with themselves, irritable with loved ones, maybe the doctors, the way they handle things, maybe the nurses, the way they handle things, So they become very irritable because of their loss. However, at that point, they may go back to denial because there might just be a roadblock, as you said. So they go back to denial. There are some persons who may reach a stage of depression. They feel so depressed. They feel as if, they cannot face another day. And depression itself could be a roadblock because depression here should be short-term in grief. But if it is long-term, so 2 years down the road, you are in a depressive mood, then you know that something is wrong. That person has not reached the end of accepting, their loss. So it means that they have met a roadblock And there are times when you may have to even help them out, rescue them out of their depression, and that's where
the structured assistance will come from.
That's right.
That's where there's. Because see, just to come in there, because as Pastor is speaking, you have to look at grief and those type of situations as a continuum, because nobody, you try to talk about those things in simplistic ways to help people to understand, but you have to look at them as continuums. People don't really, it's not one and then one and then one. Is sometimes you go to one, you come back to the next. You vacillate between until eventually you get to the place where you reach acceptance. But you have to look at it as a continuum. But continue, Pastor. Go right ahead. I just want to be sure I did that
very well. Because you see, Godfrey, persons can go into depression, serious depression, to the point where they don't eat, they don't sleep at night. So instead of sleeping, they pace in the house. They don't want to take care of themselves, their hygiene, their personal hygiene, and they become isolated from each other. So they lock themselves inside a room, and for them, life doesn't worth living. Especially in a case where a husband may lose a wife, because I have seen cases where when the wife dies, because the husband, he was so dependent on that wife that he himself grieved to death. So it could reach that point of depression, and I think that's where you're talking about the roadblock. If you can have a collapse here, because that person would have entered into serious depression, and because they enter into this, what Pearson is saying here, that they would need that structured help. That's right, that structured help, where they will need that counseling and so forth to get out of that, so that they can reach that stage of acceptance. Now, to the question you asked earlier concerning if someone could begin to grieve before the person dies, the important thing here is bringing closure, because what is happening now, what I've observed here, and the importance of this program here, is that a lot of persons don't have the opportunity to bring closure. Right. So for example, if someone dies of COVID, the restriction says that only 2 persons can identify the body. And then that coffin is closed. The rest of the family members, they don't have the opportunity to see that person for the last time.
Right.
So there are persons who have the last picture of that person in their mind. They may not have them, that picture may not be seeing them in a coffin, but they might have that last picture, because I've known of cases where when the person left home, to go to the hospital, that was the last. Some family members saw that person. That was the last time. And then the news that came thereafter is that they died. So persons don't have that opportunity to bring closure. That's why one of the things that we encourage persons to do is to have memorial service online, so persons can express themselves, speak about the person, and in doing so, you can bring a level of comfort and hope and so forth, as well as when the funeral is taking place, because you only have 20 persons.
Right.
The rest of the family members cannot be there to bring that final closure, So the best thing that we can do here is to stream that service, so that family members, there are persons who cannot come, they are overseas, and they wish they could come, but they just cannot come because of the restrictions, So in that case, if the funeral service could be streamed, so persons can at least look at it online, and then in that way, they may bring a level of closure. But just burying the person, and they didn't have that opportunity. Studies have shown that these are the persons that have serious problems in terms of dealing with their grief.
With their grief, right. We have to take a break in a moment, but a quick question to you, Mr. Strovde, and even if we need to continue after the break, we can do so. Grief is something that can be exhausting, so it can really take a lot out of an individual. Can that, or someone being in that situation, and considering that we are, as the folks say, in COVIDious time, and we know that if you do not have a strong immune system, COVID can get the better of you. Now, grief, having that kind of impact, or being able to exhaust someone to a point where they can't help themselves, can that interfere with someone's immune system?
Well, the simple answer is yes, in the sense that if you look at some of the classes of grief, or the normal grief, you have somatic distress. Soma talks about the body. The soma is the body. And so you have loss of appetite, loss of taste, tightness in the throat, shortness of breath, choking sensations, people having, as you refer to, a sense of not wanting to eat. And the reality is this. One of the fundamental issues in terms of what we have noticed, especially when it comes to physical issues, when it comes to that, when certain triggers take us, especially when dealing with stress, but that's what we're dealing with, in reality, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with stress on the body. So it's a trigger. The grief or the death becomes a trigger, and then of course we go through that mourning process, and the body, yes, gets to the place where, according to if you're in that dark place where you don't want to function and you become very weak, then your body becomes susceptible. Why? One of the fundamental things about stress and not handling stress properly is that when we have stress, too much, we get too stressed out, we have things like cortisol and so these hormones and so washing our bodies, and so it becomes very dangerous. Even they themselves can be dangerous for us. And of course, when we have that type of situation, the body becomes weak and the body becomes toxic to some extent, and of course the body gets to the place where it becomes vulnerable to illness. Sometimes it's just low-grade type of things, but of course, if we're dealing with a situation where somebody is not functioning well, if we're dealing with somebody who is exposed to that, and their body is not in a good place in terms of functioning, it's simply you become unfortunately susceptible to any type of infection and low-grade type of infections and illnesses like that.
Okay, so thank you. Here we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk some more, and a little later on we're going to open our telephone line and invite our callers if they have any questions or experiences they may want to share with us. So we go to a break and we'll be right back. Stay with us, folks. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with you in just a moment.
Measles, diabetes. Eat safe foods after an emergency or disaster. Unsafe foods can make you sick, even if it looks and smells normal. Throw away foods that come into contact with flood waters, have an unusual smell, color, or texture, and foods in damaged, rusted, or swollen cans. A message from the Grenada Food and Nutrition Council in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, with support from the Pan American Health Organization.
It's your summer everything loan from the Communal. Borrow up to $10,000 for all your needs. School supplies, staycation, home renovations, appliances or furniture. You can have it all with a summer everything loan. With competitive interest rates and same-day approvals, you can't beat this loan special. Not a member? Join today to get onto this exciting offer. It's your summer everything loan from the Communal. Apply today and take advantage of this exciting offer. Visit the nearest Communal branch or call us at 440-1755 for more information. Lending terms and conditions apply.
Valley Pharmacy offers both wholesale and retail pharmaceutical and over-the-counter products. We have the most competitive and affordable prices. We are the agents for Vit Plus multivitamin for healthy everyday lifestyle and Sonatrogen powder. Hills and Valley Pharmacy supplies the best quality, name brand clinical products such as Rescue Oil, Bio Oil, Neutrogena, Aveeno, and Clarisil. We offer the most convenient opening hours. Our telephone numbers are 435-6904 or 6903. Remember, at Hills and Valley Pharmacy, your health is our business. We care.
Now open Hills and Valley Medicare Center, your one-stop for medical supplies, massage therapy, physiotherapy, and an in-house physician. At Hills and Valley, your health is our business.
There's no better way to start your day than with me on Good Morning Grenada. Good Morning Grenada is your one-stop shop. We have information, education, entertainment, your bi-weekly traffic cam, and we link up with the sister isles of Carriacou and PT Martinique. Join me every 6:35 on weekdays for Good Morning Grenada. It's your daily dose of all things Grenadian mixed with just a little bit of crazy.
Good morning, good morning.
I said just a little bit of crazy.
I tell all of the things that take me.
Good Morning Grenada, 6:35 a.m. on weekdays, available on all GBN platforms. Start your morning off right.
This is a message from the Ministry of Health. If you or a family member suspect that you may have contracted COVID-19 and are displaying symptoms, please immediately self-isolate at home. This means that you must also avoid all contact with other members of your household. Do not visit hospitals or health centers, as this creates the potential for further spread of the virus, and it puts additional persons at risk when you come into contact with them. Your best course of action is to call the COVID-19 hotline at 458-4787 or 538-4787, or contact your nearest health center or medical station. Once your information has been received, health officials will come to you. Help prevent the spread of COVID-19. This has been a message from the Ministry of Health.
Drug abuse, cancer,
Measles.
Welcome back, folks. It's Doctor on Call, and just in case you joined us late, with me, Mr. Pearson Strovde. He's a trained counselor, and Pastor Edward Guilliame. He is the Health and Stewardship Director at the Seventh-day Adventist Conference of Churches. We're talking about grief and loss, of course, in the context of what we have faced here in Grenada with COVID-19, the large number of deaths and illnesses that we have to deal with, of course, in a lot of cases of friends, families, colleagues, and so on. Pastor Guilliame, I want to come to you with this one. And when things like that happen, people act differently, of course. We established that people can react differently. Some people probably deal with it better than others. But there are those, when they are overwhelmed, they can turn to things like drinking, use of drugs, and they may even have thoughts of hurting themselves. They may have, and I think Mr. Steward mentioned earlier, or yourself, not wanting to take care of themselves. When people get to that point of actually getting themselves involved in maybe abuse of controlled substances, because of grief and loss and their inability to deal with it, or as Mr. Strovde said, to accept it. The thing is, how do you accept the fact that your mother left home 3 weeks ago to go to hospital with COVID-19, and as time go by, of course, you hear with time, maybe after 14 days, that individual may recover and, of course, get well. And 14 days has passed and your mom is still in hospital, and then probably on the 16th or 17th day, the news comes that she has died. You possibly may not see her again. How do you accept that? And how do I prevent myself from turning to something that I perceive may bring me some comfort, like the alcohol or the drugs that get me in a state where my mind is altered away from that grief? How do we deal with it? Pastor, let me come to you first with that one.
All right. So to answer this question, Godfrey, it means therefore that person, that's a coping skill, that's a coping mechanism, that's the way they feel to cope with their loss, but it's not the best way. So because they are actually damaging their own bodies, because remember we said that grief can cause your immune system to
can take a toll on you. Yes, it can take a toll on your immune system. Mm-hmm.
It can take a toll on you, and abusing drugs, alcohol, and whatever the case may be, that again could cause detriment to your health. So in this case, I will advise that person should seek counseling. They should seek some form of professional help so that they can deal with their grief to reach to the point of acceptance. Yeah, so that's what I would say in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Let me just come in a little bit here?
Sure.
Let me come in a little bit here, because I think it's important for us to establish that when we use those type of crutches, like what we're really trying to do is avoid having to deal with the reality in front of us. So we're basically trying to push it to another side. We're trying to postpone it. And Pastor is right, it's a coping mechanism, but it's not the best one, because there's avoidance. We can project things on other people, so we can go through. But psychology will tell you, behavioral science will tell you that when it comes to certain things, the faster that you begin to get to the place where you at least accept. You remember Pastor made that excellent analogy of the tunnel. It is a tunnel you have to go through. And postponing it by using those type of substances is only going to prolong. And if you really want to get to the end of the tunnel, it is better to face. Now, it is not easy to face. Please don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I am not here under any circumstances somehow under valuing the fact that grief can be very difficult for many, many people because you may not have the support system around you. You again, as Pastor said in COVID, you may not even get to see the parent. Use the example of a mother. You may not even be one of the two. You might get to see, and the closure, you don't get that. So I get that. So please don't get me wrong. But unless we get to the place where we begin to face this, and if we continue postponing it, it's going to prolong, and we're going to use quicker. It is more likely that we get to the places like depression and so, because alcohol and those things are themselves depressants in a way, and they get the body in a particular state that you don't necessarily want to get there, because it worsens the situation. You make sometimes decisions that you eventually regret when you are under the influences and this. So while, again, and I must repeat, I am not underestimating the pain that that grief and loss and so it incurs. However, the quicker we begin to go through the tunnel, I'm going to stick with Pastor's analogy, the quicker we start that tunnel, the better off for us. The better off for us. Postponing it is going to make it worse.
And Godfrey, let me just say here that one of the things I have heard, even during this times that we are living in, is that there are persons who feel guilty. That's one of the classes of grief. They feel guilty because they would have brought COVID home to somebody who would have died.
Right.
So to them, they feel guilt. So even though they're grieving for that loved one who have died. But within them, they have that pain, as Pearson mentioned, that pain of guilt that they have to deal with. You know. So what does that mourner do? That mourner begins to accuse himself of negligence. And then he starts to exaggerate his thoughts and feelings or actions, which are other than positive. So instead of dwelling on the positive, because of that guilt, he dwells on the negative. Yeah. So he asks questions like, "What if? What if I didn't go? What if I didn't do this? What if? Yeah. Maybe I would not have brought it home, and that person got it, and they died." Or they may say, if I had only stayed home, or if I had only followed the protocols and do what I'm supposed to do, maybe my loved one would not have died, you know? And that person here could be living with that guilt, even though they are grieving. So if you are grieving and you are having that pain of guilt, why should you go and take alcohol and drugs to deal with it? It's just putting on a mask. We're already wearing masks, you know?
But here's
have to deal with that grief.
But let me butt in here, Pastor, and you know, present a scenario to both yourself and Mr. Strovde. So we're sticking with that. Someone brought COVID home, and someone died of it, and they start asking themselves questions. You know, you have guilt added to the loss of maybe your mom or your dad or somebody in your family. And you should not go to the alcohol or the drugs to get your mind off it. But then you have another thought. What if I decide to talk to someone about it? Wouldn't that person say, well, you know, I don't know what you're telling me because you're the one that bring it home. What about the fear of how people see them? In addition to having to deal with the guilt of, look, I brought it home. I've lost my mother. So I am dealing with my guilt plus what people are saying about me. It is a very difficult thing. How, I mean, and let's go to the psychologist here, sir. How do I deal with that?
Yeah, I get what you. I hear what you. I hear what you're saying, and it's realistic. It's a very real situation, and you know, you brought up the point. You know, I might go and talk to somebody. I would really hope that it's not a counselor, a psychologist that would do that, because we're supposed to be non-judgmental. We are supposed to listen. We are supposed to be there for people, to give them unconditional positive regard and all of those wonderful things. But sometimes you might talk to the guy, Brandon, you say, but you know, by you not do that, you know, those kind of things like that. The reality is that it is a very real and difficult thing to have to deal with. Nobody wants to be responsible for the death of somebody, especially somebody that they love. So nobody wants to ever have to walk that road. But unfortunately, if that is the case, it is going to be a very, very difficult road to walk. But it does not mean, on the nose, you see, you are going to compound it if you try and use drugs and them kind of things. It's going to be compounded because you are going to make matters worse for yourself. You may possibly make even worse decisions, and you will compound a really bad situation and make it into possibly a worse one. How do you deal with that? I believe that you need to find somebody who you can trust, seriously trust, somebody who is professional. That's right. Somebody who is going to listen to you, not put judgment on you, and to help you process the reality that is facing you. And so in a sense like that, you're going to have to look for structured help. That is one thing I believe that someone, you know, will have to really seek after counseling in a really professional way, because Yeah, just going by the brother down the road and tell him, yeah, that's not a nice place to be. I believe structured help is the best way to go in terms of a situation like that. And of course, anybody who is supposed to be worth being called a therapist, counselor, psychologist, but must give that unconditional positive regard, must give that non-judgmental listening ear and helping that person to process that, because that cannot be an easy thing to go through. I don't know if Pastor wants to say something on that.
Right. Pastor, let me come back to you. Let me come back to you, Pastor. Now, and of course, being a pastor and someone who is, involved in the church and all of that, I'm thinking here of different circles. Now, let's say someone within your circle, and I'm talking about someone within the church structure dies. The family of that person who's grieving, not the family of the person who is grieving, the family of that individual who was died. So the grieving family then, they might be in a better position in terms of support, because you have maybe, fellow church members, and so to give you the support, to call, to visit, and provide that kind of support and friendship that you need during that time. But what about people who are outside of that circle, who probably need some spiritual upliftment, someone who probably needs someone to kneel and pray with them and provide some kind of hope, someone who probably is not aware that Mr. Strovde is available to come and talk to me and counsel me and get me to understand, look, yes, grieving is a part of the process, but it is not something that you have to live on, because it can do more harm to you. How do you reach out to people outside of that circle to provide that kind of spiritual and, in Mr. Strovde's case, psychological assistance for people like that?
All right.
I don't know which one of you. Pastor, you can go first.
Yeah, so let me share a scenario with you here. We had a member who died. Wasn't from COVID, but she died sometime last month. And it wasn't only the family that was grieving at that time, the church, because the Sabbath before, she sang in the praise team. She's part of the praise team. She sang. To me, that was the last time some members saw her. But during that next week, she became ill, went into the hospital on Thursday, and died by the Saturday. She died that time. So as a pastor, I myself felt the pain. I had to deal with it too. I was grieving because I was there with the husband at the hospital trying to reassure him and so forth. But it wasn't only him. It wasn't only the family members, but the church. So what I did for 2 Saturdays when I went to church, I did a presentation on grief and loss with them, how to handle grief, how to handle loss. And I did it for 2 Saturdays because members came to church and they were crying. Members came to church and you could see that they were not, church wasn't what it should be. So it means, therefore, that as a pastor, I have to be sensitive to the needs of others. So I cannot ignore their grief and just go business as usual. I can do that. So I have to ensure that I meet the needs of those persons who are grieving. So what did I do? I said, we're going to have church in the morning, and in the afternoon, we decided to go to the family's home. We went there, we sing, we pray, we give assurance, and so forth to the family. But by extension, the community, we had a memorial service online the day before the funeral. So we had persons from the diaspora logging in. we had a number of persons, and we gave them the opportunity, just to speak about that person, as to how, she impacted their lives and so forth. So this is one of the ways. You see, right now, it's kind of is a real challenge, Godfrey. It's a real challenge trying to reach out to the community, because there are persons who are still skeptical. They don't want you to come to visit them, because, they are so fearful of COVID. And we ourselves as pastors, we have to be sensitive to that than just going to a person's home, and exposing ourselves as well as exposing them. So we have to try to find ways and means to meet the needs of the family members, the needs of the church, and the needs of the community on a whole. And this is why we are doing this program. Because we want to help persons. A lot of persons are dying around us, especially from COVID in Grenada. Right now the funeral homes are inundated with deaths. Somebody shared with me later last week, I think it was last week, they had 6 funerals in one cemetery. In one morning, in 1 hour. 6 funerals. Could you imagine this? So it means that Grenada, we need that kind of support, and that's why myself and Pearson is here to help persons to cope with grief and loss. So I hope the information that we are sharing is very valuable, that can help you to go through that period of grief and loss.
Right. Mr. Strovde, I just want you to extend a bit on what Pastor said, because I want to get also from you persons outside of the church. So someone you're not a member of the church. You probably don't even have friends in the church. You probably don't even know who are some of the people in the church are. But you are in a situation, you're probably within that community, and you have suffered loss, and so you are grieving. How do you reach out to people like that? How do you help them in terms of professional help? Should we maybe I should ask if there is some sort of program, or would it be a good idea to have a program where there is outreach to people like that?
There are programs. I have participated in a few of them. Only last week I met with public officers. Next week we'll be meeting with members of credit union. There is outreach. There is outreach. Only recently I had to visit the home of one of our persons in the military service who died, and I worked with the family. I went a few weeks ago. On yesterday I went again, because the reality is that this is a very difficult time for a lot of people, and so yes, there is outreach. It may not reach everybody, but what I think has to happen is that you have to try and make these things as more public as possible. And I know the credit union next week, I think Credit Union League is putting out one that I'll be a part of. So all members of the credit union could be a part of it if they want to. So there are things that are happening. There people are reaching out to the community, and the point I think that you're making is a fundamental one, in that yes, the church has its community, but there are some members, there are some people who are outside of that community of the church, and they need to be reached as well. And whether it's the church itself, putting people like myself out there and helping others, these are some of the things I think even the church has done. I have been a part of some outreach from the church as well. Yesterday I had outreach from the church. There were about 50, almost 70 something people on that. Not everybody was a member per se. So there is outreach, even organized from the church perspective, and there is some outreach from the perspective of the community as well. So it's happening. Is it enough? No, I think there needs to be more. But yes, I think the point you're making is that needs to be done, and yes, some of it is being done.
Okay, excellent.
There's a psychosocial department at the Ministry of Social Development that I understand is involved in that kind of outreach. So persons who need that kind of structural support they can tap into. Yeah, and as Pearson might rightly mention,
that is 100% correct. Yes.
Okay. So, gentlemen, let's just.
Pearson mentioned the church has that support as well. So, persons who need prayer, we have a prayer hotline. We can refer. We have counselors, a psychosocial team that we have formed. So persons they can call. That prayer hotline is oftentimes advertised when we have our services online, so that they can call into that hotline. And if they need prayers, if they need that kind of psychosocial support, then we can always refer them to one of our counselors, and they will be able to give that sort of psychosocial support. If they need spiritual support, they can also be referred to one of us as pastors who can give that spiritual support as well. Yeah. So the structures are there. The structures are there to help.
Right. So gentlemen, let's just take our final commercial break. When we come back quickly, I want us to touch a little bit on, the aspect of grief as it relates to children, and then we're going to open our telephone lines to involve our listeners. So stay with us, folks. We'll be back in just a moment.
Drug abuse.
And Valley Pharmacy offers both wholesale and retail pharmaceutical and over-the-counter products. We have the most competitive and affordable prices. We are the agents for Vit Plus multivitamin for healthy everyday lifestyle and Synaptogen powder. Hills and Valley Pharmacy supplies the best quality, name brand clinical products such as Rescue Oil, Bio Oil, Neutrogena, Aveeno, and Clarisil. We offer the most convenient opening hours. Our telephone numbers are 435-6904 or 6903. Remember, at Hills and Valley Pharmacy, your health is our business. We care.
Now open, Hills and Valley Medicare Center, your one-stop for medical supplies, massage therapy, physiotherapy, and an in-house physician. At Hills and Valley, your health is our business.
The croton scale insect, a new threat to our agricultural production, is now creating major damage to several plants. Mango, soursop, plums, guava, avocado, and crotons are among the main ones affected. Excessive sooty mold, black blight, is associated with this pest. Take action now. Cut and burn infested fruits and shoots. Do not move infested materials to other areas. Treat with horticultural oils and recommended insecticides. Request assistance from the Ministry of Agriculture. Follow all safety protocols when burning trash or applying pesticides. A message from the Ministry of Agriculture.
When a loved one passes on, we all need the comfort, support, and guidance of a trusted friend. You can rely on LaCour Brothers Funeral Home. We provide a personalized professional service that exceeds all expectations. Our dedicated staff responds to your every need with the greatest detail, ensuring affordability with a variety of options. Our upgraded state-of-the-art facilities, spacious air-conditioned chapel with live internet streaming, a modern, environmentally safe crematorium, the only of its kind on island, private viewing spaces, large on-site repast center, a modern transportation fleet. Join our burial society today and make personalized arrangements for that final moment as you prepare to enter your loved one into eternal rest. Visit or call LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and select a package that brings added comfort to the entire family. LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and Burial Society, continuing a tradition of excellence.
Looking for that injection of vibes and energy, of course? Well, I've got just that. Hi, my name is Gary Mr. Smooth, and I'm inviting you to join me on the Hot Morning Show on Hot 98.5, 98.7 FM. Weekdays, Monday to Friday, 6 to 10 in the morning. I've got a healthy dose of your favorite and most infectious hits sampled with information, news, laughter, and all the other ingredients that go into making the hottest morning show on the radio, The Morning Heat. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit us up on WhatsApp, 435-7517. We've got topics, we've got discussions, calls, voice notes, and so much more. But I can't tell you everything. You got to tune in. The Hot Morning Show on Hot FM 98.5, 98.7 with yours truly, Gary, Mr. Smooth. Kaboom!
Drug abuse.
Welcome back, folks, and our telephone line is open. The number is 435-2041. So if you have any questions you would like to ask our guest, you can do so. The number again, 435-2041. Or if you have some experience you'd like to share with us, we'll be more than happy to accommodate you. All right, again, 435-2041. That's the number you can call. Gentlemen, grief in children, because I think that's a very, very important aspect of this whole exercise. As adults, they are in a position to, speak out what they feel and to express it probably in different ways. It may not be the same with children. To me, that can be of great concern, and I'm sure the psychologists will agree with me. How do we approach this as people who are involved in that field? How do we deal with children? How do we provide support for children who are experiencing grief? And I'm talking here, let's say children between the ages of 5 and 10. Let's start with a psychologist. Yes.
Children in general would grieve differently from adults, and you've made that point. Sometimes you have issues in terms of irritability, in terms of their inability to sleep. That age group especially, you might see them trying to mimic a lot. Sometimes you see them mimicking the person who has died. They try to be that person for a while. You have sometimes, you hear them sometimes talking. They believe that they're talking to the person. Mm-hmm. There's excessive acting out, negative acting out type of behaviors, because they're compensating. As you rightly said, they're not adults. They are not able to edit themselves as well as you. Might say, boy, calm down. A child is a child, and so that editing that an adult might have, it would be difficult for a child. So you would find those type of situations happening with children. From a parent perspective, one of the things that we have to do is to understand that these things are normal. These are the realities of having to grieve. Sometimes you lose a brother, sister, a mother, a parent, very close relative, and children. We need to be patient with them. Just as how you would tell an adult, you can't rush them. Even more so for children, we have to be very careful not to rush them into feeling better. We have to give them an opportunity to be able to express themselves. Of course, within reason, we talk with them, we help them to understand what is happening, we guide them, we help them to understand the process. As parents, even for ourselves, we're struggling for ourselves, but we had to step up and say, this is what is happening. But I think the fundamental word is patience. Being patient with them, being understanding, guiding them, and helping them to understand what is happening with them, and that they're not something is wrong with them because they are doing those things, and that eventually it will pass. Eventually they will come out of it. Eventually it's not going to be like this. It's going to be intense in the beginning, and it's going to eventually fizzle out. But children who are supported, I think the point that Pastor made earlier on for adults, these things are true even for children. Mm-hmm. If you have support, if you get the closure, those things, children especially need closure. Children especially need closure. And so that's why sometimes you get them to write little letters so that you could, even though they themselves might not be able to put it in the coffin, you give it to them, you let them write it, let them know that you're going to put it in a hole for them, those kind of things like that. These are the type of things that you have to do with children to help them to be able to get to that place of closure. Because if a child doesn't have closure, we're talking about sometimes a lifetime of struggles with those type of issues. So that is what I would say in terms of that.
Right. Pastor Guilliame.
The flip side of that, Godfrey, just let me say the flip side of this is sometimes it could be difficult to bring closure. So, especially when the child doesn't quite understand what is happening. So the child is still asking, where's mommy? Where's mommy? And where's daddy? And where's brother? he doesn't quite understand what has happened. And to bring closure here could be a difficult, challenge for the parents or whoever, the guardian or the persons who are supporting that child. So in this case, as Pearson rightly mentioned, that child will really need that kind of support, and it takes patience, real patience, because the child may just keep asking for mommy or asking for daddy because he doesn't understand. So there are ways and means that you may have to find to help that child to bring closure. Yeah, but it's a difficult process at that.
Yeah, you sort of basically went the direction I was going, because I was asking, what would you say, for example, to other adults within the family as it relates to providing the support for the child? What do you do? How do you treat that child? What do you say to the child? In terms of spirituality, whether or not the child might be able to understand that too may be a difficult thing. So basically, what do you say? And from a pastoral perspective, what do you say to family members who have to deal with a child that is undergoing such a level of grief? The child knows mommy or daddy got sick, and yes, they went to the hospital to see a doctor with the expectation that the doctor is going to work the miracle so mommy or daddy may come back home. But a week has passed, 2 weeks, mommy has not come back home. How do you deal with a child in that situation? What do you say to the adults? How do you, as a pastor?
Yeah, well, Godfrey, it's difficult. It's difficult to answer that question. But what I can say here, sometimes telling the child that mommy is dead or daddy is dead, the child sometimes still doesn't understand that. You bring the child to the funeral home to see the person in the coffin, and the child may think, well, the person is sleeping in a bed, So sometimes it could be very difficult if they are older children, but you said it's 5-year-old, 6-year-old, sometimes they still don't understand. I remember when my mom died, I didn't quite understand. I was a very young chap, very young boy, and I remember, the funeral was going on and I was there playing. It's like I didn't quite understand what was happening. But afterwards, growing older, you understand what loss is like, and yes, no, as I look back, I could say, yes, I've really, it brought pain to me thereafter. So sometimes as children, it's difficult to, sometimes you don't know what to say. You really don't know what to say. I don't know if Pearson has anything to share on that, but sometimes it's real difficult.
You see, one of the things that we have to see with children, one of the things that is really important with childhood is that sometimes their innocence protects them. So their innocence of not being able to actually rationalize could be a good thing for a while. Because they're not able to figure this thing out. And I think that's maybe the master's way of helping them to gradually get into the reality. So sometimes we kind of want them to understand, but it may not necessarily be the best thing for them to fully understand. And it is okay to allow their innocence to keep them back a bit, and that they gradually move into understanding, as opposed to shoving that understanding on them, because to be, even for an adult to face reality like that. We were talking earlier on about people who go to alcohol. Could you imagine a 5-year-old or 6-year-old having to face the real true reality of loss? So the innocence protects them to some extent, and that is not a bad thing really. But we gradually help them to we explain it to them. We do the little things like letting them write their letters. You let them know that this is you talk to them about the finality of it. They may not get it, but as time goes on, they would realize that this is mommy really not coming back. Mommy really not coming back. So the innocence helps to protect them a bit. but it really helps them to do it in a gradual way, and eventually it comes. So while I know it's kind of, we talk about the closure and we know it's important, the innocence helps to protect them to some extent so that it doesn't come too heavy, because as adults, much less. We sometimes, the heaviness of that can crush us, much less a child.
Right. Gentlemen, we're getting close to our wrap-up time, but there are a couple of things I want us to put into perspective. We have looked at grief and loss, and a lot of great information came out, and I think our listeners have a very good understanding of what we're talking about. But to put it into context as we get ready to wrap, I want you gentlemen to talk a little bit about, or probably identify a few ways in which people can actually deal with it. And I'm talking here about maybe on a day-to-day basis. What are some of the things that people can do to help themselves, face that grief and loss that they experience? But just before we go to that, let's go to the telephone. I think we have a caller on the line. Dr. Call, good evening. Well, we seem to have lost that call. We waited a little too long. So, folks, the number again, 435-2041. You can get through to the program using that number, 435-2041. So, gentlemen, let's start with Pastor Guilliame. What are some of the ways that you can share with people of how to deal with loss? And let's bear in mind our present situation. We can't have the funerals we would like to. We can't go over and sympathize and probably spend a couple hours with that grieving person. We can't go to the funeral. We can't go and cry over the coffin. And as we say locally, Pastor, I don't know if Mr. Strovde is familiar with some of the little things from the outer parishes, to go and count your little reason by the grave and talk about some of the things that the people do. But it may sound a little.
I'm a Grenadian, so yes.
Well, all right, yeah. I mean, every little community have their own little subculture. So forgive me there. Yes. So yes, there are ways, and I would like us to maybe point out a couple of those, so people listening, if they have experienced that kind of loss, they would have a good idea as to how to go about, dealing with it day by day to get over and to accept what has happened. So we can start with Pastor.
So in this case, what I do, Godfrey, whenever I visit the family members or I call them, like in these times you organize the funeral via the phone.
Pastor, I think you may have muted your microphone. We lost you for a moment.
You hearing me now?
Yes. You're back with us. Yes, we're back with us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so as I was saying here, I usually prepare them for what they should expect. That's one of the things that I do. So now that we are in this COVIDious times, I let the family members know that this is what will happen. This is what you should expect. It's 20 persons, yeah? If the person dies from COVID, they may have the information, but you still reiterate. You let them know what will be the process, all right? And I think when you do that, in other words, you go through a period of orientation with that person so that they are aware as to what to expect. So even though they go to the funeral, they are prepared. They know, well, look, it's 20 persons, I mightn't be able to go. And I also prepare them. I say, look, if you can stream it so that persons who may want to view, you may have your loved ones that you want to view the funeral service. I also prepare them for that. Now, one of the things I will say to a person who have suffered loss is to understand that there are stages of grief that they will go through. And as I spoke about the tunnel, they will go through that tunnel of grief. It's a process. Don't allow anyone to force you to stop grief, you take your time and grieve. You take your time, because everybody, some persons may grieve longer than others. So the person must understand that they will go through that process of grief. And we would have spoken about it, the Kubler-Ross model, where that person may start with denial, then anger, then depression, then bargaining, until they reach the stage of acceptance. And I usually say to persons, look, you may start well. You may reach a point of bargaining, or you may even reach a point of acceptance and go back to denial. So you can go back and forth on that model, back and forth. So don't beat up yourself. Don't beat up yourself. Take your time and grieve. Don't let anybody come and force you and say, well, it's time for you to move on with your life. Don't let anybody force you to finish grieving. So you take your time and grieve. I will also let a person know that it will take time before they can begin to feel a sense of normalcy again. All right, and I think I would have mentioned that in the previous point. So it would take some time to get back into normalcy. So don't force yourself to get back to that time. However, let me just say here that it should not be prolonged. So if 2 years down the road you are grieving as though the thing is fresh, then something is wrong. It means that you need help. All right? And as Pearson says, grief does not finish. It doesn't end. Yeah? But it gets less. The intensity of it gets less. All right? So as time rolls on, because healing comes with time. So all of these I will let them know. I will also say to the person that they should know the difference between grief and depression. And persons around them should observe whether that person is going into depression, into the point where they begin to isolate themselves. They no longer want to eat. The outlook on life is very poor. Sometimes they have suicidal ideations. I remember doing a funeral once, and that daughter, it's a daughter who died, and her mom, she had abnormal grief. When I went to visit her, after she would have buried her daughter, you could have sensed that she was going through abnormal grief. Her outlook on life became very grim. As a matter of fact, she grieved until she died, because she kept saying, I want to go to meet my daughter. I want to go to meet my daughter. I cannot live without my daughter. How could my daughter leave me behind? And all of those things. So there's abnormal grief, and the abnormal grief could lead a person into depression. So you must know the difference, and those around you must know if you are going into the depression. So if you no longer want to socialize, you don't have that zest or that zeal to do what you used to do, you don't want to go to work, you don't want to go to school, then it therefore means that person might just be going into depression, and that person may need help. Now, the other thing I would say to them is that expect triggers. There are some things that will trigger your grief. So let's say, for example, a husband loses his wife, all right? And when her birthday comes around, that's a trigger. When anniversary comes around, that's a trigger. And someone says that grief is like a wave. Sometimes, it comes in nice and calm, like when you go to the beach, the waves. And then there are times when it comes in like a big, it's just a big gush. And sometimes it pitches you over. And then you have to catch yourself again. So you have to expect triggers. There are certain things that will trigger your grief. And that's why grief does not end, because as you go along in life, even though the intensity gets less, but as you go along with time, you will realize that there are times when you just start to cry because you remember something that both of you all used to do, and that's a trigger. The final thing I would say here is that you should share your feelings with others. Don't keep it to yourself. It's good to talk. And while it is good to talk, it is good for us to listen. All right? So a person who is grieving, they may not want to talk at the moment, But your presence, just being there for them, just being there. Sometimes you don't have to say a word, but just being there. And if they want to talk, it's good to be a listener. So you listen to their feelings, you know, and you reassure them, keep reassuring them. If they want to cry, don't tell them don't cry. Leave them let it cry. Give them tissue, you know, and allow them to cry, especially men. You know, men cope with grief differently to women. You know, women, they express themselves, they cry anyway, you know, anything, they cry. But men, they tend to suppress their grief, yeah? And men feel that if they cry, that they are weak. But men, let me say to you, if you suffer loss, don't be afraid to cry. That doesn't make you less than a man. It doesn't make you weak, yeah? And if you have to speak to somebody as Pearson would have mentioned earlier, speak to somebody who you trust, somebody who can give you the assurance, the support, and the care that you may need.
Right. So, Mr. Strovde, something Pastor mentioned as it relates to triggers, and it's very interesting, but is it true that one of the ways of dealing with grief, let's say in the same case of husband and wife, is to possibly create fond memories? So, for example, although an anniversary may be a trigger, but an anniversary that was really special, let's say maybe your 10th anniversary or maybe your 20th anniversary, and you had a really wonderful time. How do we parallel that in terms of that being a trigger or that being a fond memory to help you overcome the grief?
Yeah, I think what you're hinting at is making something of a memorial of a very positive time you had in your life with that particular person, your partner or so. And yes, that's a very fundamental and sometimes very useful way to approach it, because you can then, as to use your term, you can turn it around. You can turn it what is supposed to necessarily. And the issue is, what Pastor is saying here, I think the important thing is to preempt it. Know that it is possibly a trigger, and if you preempt it and you plan for it not to be a negative one, then yes, you can use that and turn it into something but positive, especially if you have children and you use it as a time to remember mommy and all of the good things that she meant to us. Yeah, definitely. We can definitely use that to turn it into. But again, the idea is to really preempt the trigger, not know it is coming, know it is a possibility that it could create some problems, and then of course turn it into something that is positive. But it's very important as well that just to add on one thing, we have to learn to take care of ourselves, especially when it comes to grief. We have to learn to take care of ourselves. And I'm going to say something that may, that is a reality, especially in our time. Everybody is nice. When the person dies, everybody wants to come over. When in COVID, they can't come over. Everybody call in and everything, but they put the person in the grave, and after that, fight for land, fight for days. And then these are the kinds of things that we go through. It's a reality. That's where we live.
No, of course.
These are the kind of realities. And as a person, you have to learn to be able to take care of yourself. And all of that noise that's around you, you're going to have to get to the place where you shut that noise out. Because it's going to be this one pulling there and this one fighting and this one feeling they should have this and all of those type of negative things. And we have to be able to block that noise off, take care of yourself, and be able to say, you see what, somebody else is going to handle this one, because today I can't deal with this. And we have to accept that this, you have to be able to realize, know our threshold, know when, listen, I cannot take anymore. This is not for me right now. Somebody else is going to have to do this. Know yourself, take care of yourself. Because in our context, these things happen. These things happen, and it becomes even worse and become more of a negative than it needs to be. Yeah. So that's what I will add on to that.
Right. Wonderful.
Godfrey, let me just say here, Godfrey, that when it comes to taking care of yourself, the person must ensure that they eat well, they exercise. Yeah, there's a new start principle that we promote. So they eat well, they exercise, ensure that they hydrate and rehydrate themselves, they must ensure that they exercise temperance, and that's where the alcohol and drug addiction could come in. So you exercise temperance, you abstain from those things that are unhealthy, and those things that are good, you ensure that you are moderate in your use. Then when it comes to, it's good to take fresh air. So you go outside, and sometimes, the pressure of grief is so much on you that you go outside and you take some nice fresh air, and that could bring some form of relief. Then the person must ensure that they have rest, adequate rest. That's why sleep at night is very important, because in grieving, person can have sleepless nights, and this could affect the mental health as a result. And then the most important one is to ensure that they trust in God. All right, trust in God. And there's something that Pearson mentioned that I just want to zero in on. Before the funeral, a lot of people flood your home. They come and sympathize. But after the funeral, that's it. No more calls, no more messages, no more visits. I want to just go back again. In a case where a husband may lose a wife, and he alone is home, begins to feel lonely. And loneliness alone can plunge that person into depression. Because that person don't have that support that he had before the funeral. So funeral is over, and then he goes back home, and he's looking through the window because he expects somebody to show up. Nobody shows up. He expects a phone call. No phone call. He expects a message. No message. And then it starts affecting that person psychologically, and that could plunge him or her into depression. So when someone dies, especially when they're alone, it's good to give them the support, still visit, still call, still check up on them, and ensure that they are doing well.
Right. Well, gentlemen, I know this is a very interesting, conversation we've been having, and I know Pastor can go on some more. Although he was concerned that 2 hours might be long, and I know he hasn't finished yet. But gentlemen, it's a pity that's all the time we have for this evening, and I thank you guys very, very much. I thank you, gentlemen, very, very much for accepting the invitation to be here with us, to discuss this very important issue, because there are a lot of people who are going through that right now. The grief, the pain, the difficult periods, and we felt it was very important to have you gentlemen come on and speak to it, and from time to time that kind of conversation needs to be had. So let me give you at least a minute each to say anything that you would like to say to the public, to our listeners in closing. So let's start with you, Mr. Strovde.
All right, again, thanks for the opportunity to share. I think the only thing I would really want to reiterate or reemphasize is that we understand, each of us understand that grief is a process. Don't rush yourself. Don't let anybody rush you. It takes time. It takes time. And accept that is a reality. Those persons who are family members, who are supporters, give the support that is needed. Don't force people. Be careful about what you say. Don't go and say things like, "Hey, boy, you'll get over that. Don't worry about that. That's no big thing." It's not a big thing. The person just lost their family. It's a big thing. You got to be careful about how we talk to people, the words that we use. We mean well, we really just want to say, "I'm sorry you're going through that," but maybe that's what we should say. Just say we're sorry. But we try to make it, just it'll be simple. Sometimes all the persons really need is just for somebody to listen.
Right.
They don't necessarily want anybody to talk to them. They just want somebody to listen. I think that those are the things I would say at this time. Thanks again for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much. And just not before you go, Mr. Strovde, let me just say to you that I'll be calling you again. So just keep that in mind. Pastor Guilliame, your final words. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to leave just two texts with the listeners and viewers. Psalm chapter 30 and verse 5 says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy will certainly come in the morning. Mm-hmm. And then there's this text in John chapter 14, 1 to 3 that says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, you may be also. These are a text of hope that we have as we live in this troubled world, this miserable world with COVID and so many people dying. We still can find hope in the Word of God. We can find hope. We can still turn to Jesus. And I might not be able to identify with you, Godfrey, if you lose a loved one. I cannot identify with Pearson if he lost a loved one, yeah? But I'm certain that there's one person who can identify with us because he's touched with the feelings of our infirmities, and that person is Jesus. And so I give you Jesus. You can turn to Jesus. He's the one that can heal your pain, can heal your sorrow, he can heal your grief, yeah, when we turn to Jesus. Thank you very much, Godfrey, for this opportunity to share. I really enjoyed it, and I want to wish you all the best as you continue programs like this.
Thank you very much, Pastor. And of course, yes. That's why I said I know he's not ready to go yet. You know, he has not fulfilled.
And all the time, Pearson, for just being there. You know, to support. We are here to support each other. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed, gentlemen. I thank you as well, and I think we need to continue these discussions, especially considering what we faced. We have to accept one fact, that COVID is here to stay. We may suppress it, but from time to time, we may find it popping up here and there. So we need to be on guard, people, and it's very important to understand and what the gentleman said to us this evening. Very, very important, because at some point, maybe not now, not soon, but at some point, grief may come our way, and it's not just COVID, but it can come in different forms, as you heard this evening. It may come our way, and so we have to be able to deal with it when it comes. All right. So thank you very much to our listeners, our viewers. Thanks to our friends on the Facebook, on the WhatsApp platform, and on YouTube. We thank you very much, GBN Television. We thank you so very much for staying with us. You can join us next Tuesday for another program on Doctor on Call. Gentlemen, thank you again, and I'll be calling you soon. All the best, and do have a good night.
God bless.
That's our program this evening, folks. Thank you once again, and until tomorrow, please God, do have a good night.
It was in recognition that Indigenous women had been the most...
Drug abuse, cancer,